He wants the best for us, and to experience Him and realize that all other things that compete for our affection on earth get nowhere close to Him. They are ultimately unworthy of our devotion, whereas He is so worthy.
Thanks for joining us for Mission 66, brought to you by TWR in partnership with the Bible teaching ministry of Dr. Luis Sao. Today, we're in Deuteronomy, a book that offers timeless wisdom and helps us apply faith to our daily life, choices, and relationships. You can download your study guide at mission66.org. Now here's Esther to introduce today's topic.
Our journey in the book of Deuteronomy continues today as we'll focus in on chapter 5, which is a repetition of what we saw back in Exodus 20, where God's law in the Ten Commandments were given. Now, perhaps you have heard of the Ten Commandments, but have never read what they are or what they mean for our society in the 21st century. Our teacher, John Matthews, will bring us up to speed with the theme, the meaning of the Ten Commandments.
Esther, thank you so much, and a very warm welcome to Mission 66. Wherever you're joining us from today, it is so good to have your company. As we reach Deuteronomy chapter 5, and we're finding here a review of the Ten Commandments. But what do they mean for us really today? Well, let's start by reading first of all. This is verse 1. And Moses summoned all Israel, and he said to them, Hear, O Israel, the statutes and the rules that I speak in your hearing today, and you shall learn them and be careful to do them. The Lord our God made a covenant with us in Horeb, that is Mount Sinai. Not with our fathers did the Lord make this covenant, but with us, who are all of us here alive today. The Lord spoke with you face to face at the mountain out of the midst of the fire, whilst I stood between the Lord and you at that time to declare to you the word of the Lord, for you were afraid because of the fire, and you did not go up into the mountain. And he said, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Well, that takes in a lot of possible interpretations, doesn't it? And it leaves nothing pretty much out. So no carved image or even likeness, meaning statuary or depictions on a paper or a wall. And by extension, let's bring it a little more into the modern world. We could say that would include TV, computers, games, digital technology, photography, fine arts, whatever it might be that would take the place of God. He goes on in verse 9 to say, You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. The reason here God doesn't want us to worship anything else is not because he's an egotist, but because he wants us to live and experience and taste true love. He is the source of life. He is the source of love. And so he wants the best for us to experience him and realize that all other things that compete for our affection on earth get nowhere close to him. They are unworthy, so unworthy of our devotion, whereas he is so worthy. Verse 11, You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, For the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. We need to guard our tongues, even in private, because that name above all names is not to be dishonored. Verse 12. Observe the Sabbath day to keep it holy, as the Lord your God commanded you. 6 days you shall labour and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter or your male servant or your female servant or your ox or your donkey or any of your livestock or the sojourner who is within your gates, that your male servant and your female servant may rest as well as you. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. Now, we could well discuss whether we worship on the Jewish Sabbath, which is our Saturday, or the first day of the week, which is our Sunday, the day on which Jesus rose from the dead. The point is, one of the 7 is to be for the Lord. Verse 16, honour your father and your mother, as the Lord your God commanded you, that your days may be long, and that it may go well with you in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder, and you shall not commit adultery. The word adultery there has a broad meaning. It takes in all sexual immorality. Verse 19, and you shall not steal. And that doesn't mean just burglary or robbing. It means an attempt to take anyone else's property by illegitimate means. That is stealing. If you are an employee, it means not stealing material or time. Verse 20, and you shall not bear false witness against your neighbour. This is an exhortation to tell the truth. Lying to cover up a crime or to protect somebody else is bearing false witness. When you do it to make a neighbour look bad, that's bearing false witness against them, whether in court or out or in the record or in public or across the back fence with a neighbour. Defaming someone else's character is slander. When it's published on paper, we call it libel. Verse 21, and you shall not covet your neighbour's wife. You shall not desire your neighbour's house, his field, or his male servant, or his female servant, his ox or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbour's. Be content with what you have. If you have a need, appeal to the Lord in prayer rather than trying to get it by coveting or plotting or scheming. Verse 22, these words the Lord spoke to all your assembly at the mountain out of the midst of the fire, the cloud, and the thick darkness with a loud voice, and he added no more. And he wrote them on 2 tablets of stone, and he gave them to me. And as soon as you heard the voice out of the midst of the darkness, whilst the mountain was burning with fire, you came near to me, all the heads of your tribes and your elders. And you said, behold, the Lord our God has shown us his glory and his greatness, and we have heard his voice out of the midst of the fire. This day we have seen God speak with man, and man still live. Now therefore, why should we die? For this great fire will consume us. If we hear the voice of the Lord our God any more, we shall die. For who is there of all flesh that has heard the voice of the living God speaking out of the midst of the fire, as have we, and has still lived? Go near and hear all that the Lord our God will say, and speak to us all that the Lord our God will speak to you, and we will hear and do it. And the Lord heard your words when you spoke to me. And the Lord said to me, I have heard the words of this people which they have spoken to you. They are right in all that they have spoken. Oh, that they had such a heart as this always, to fear me and to keep all my commandments, that it might go well with them and with their descendants forever. It seems as though the Lord here discerns, of course he does, that the hearts of the people are not completely true, that despite what they say, he knows what is coming. And so verse 30 says, Go and say to them, return to your tents. But you stand here by me, and I will tell you the whole commandment and the statutes and the rules that you shall teach them, that they may do them in the land that I am giving them to possess. You shall be careful, therefore, to do as the Lord your God has commanded you. You shall not turn aside to the right hand or to the left. You shall walk in all the way that the Lord your God has commanded you, that you may live, and that it may go well with you, and that you may live long in the land that you shall possess. And that is around the main theme of today, because God's demands are perfect. They're not for our destruction, but for our good. He has our very best interests at heart, and he knows the exact way that we should live our lives that is best for us. And so here you have the first 4 commandments, and they refer specifically to our relationship to God, and the last 6 refer to our relationship to our fellow man. Jesus Christ summarized the first 4 when he said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, and all your strength. And Jesus then summarized the next 6 commandments when he added the phrase, love your neighbor as yourself.
This is Mission 66, a great program heard around the world each day in several different languages. And friend, I want to thank you so much for your prayers and your financial partnership with Mission 66. This truly allows us to reach listeners in multiple languages around the world. Now, we do ask that you would prayerfully consider making a donation to the ministry by visiting mission66.org. That's mission66.org. And you may ask yourself, well, what does my support do for this ministry? Well, the hope for us here is to produce programs in more languages so that more people can hear of the saving grace of Jesus Christ. And with your partnership, that will be possible. So thank you so much for considering supporting this ministry. Well, I'm Esther, and we're going to move now into our question and answer time with John. And I'd actually like for us to start off here. Earlier, John, you said that the book of Deuteronomy was written in the form of a contract. Okay, so can you repeat this part for us? What exactly does that look like?
Yeah, Esther, look, simply put, it was written in the similar form as some of the ancient contracts which kings would make with their subjects. So a sovereign would write something like, as your lord and master, these are the things that I require from you, my subjects, and in exchange for your loyalty, I offer to provide your necessities to protect you from all outside harm. Well, in a similar way, God may well write here, I exercised my divine power to choose you for myself and take you out of Egypt, delivering you from slavery. In exchange, these are the obligations and the responsibilities that I require of you as my people. The 10 Commandments were the big requirements that God was placing before his nation. Those 10 were the main ones, especially the one where the people were to recognize God as their only God and to seek no other. And it reveals to us that God has no rival. He is unique and above all, so different from the many gods so-called of the nations who were flawed and in many cases immoral, and as immoral as the people were, and were effectively false gods They weren't real gods.
So, John, this chapter sort of presents itself as do's and don'ts. And I think very many people can get stuck in that space. But what do you think? Does it teach us that we can go to heaven if we just keep these commandments and we're diligent about that? How should we actually look at what this chapter is saying?
Well, I suppose in theory we would be saved if we kept every commandment perfectly from birth to death. If that were possible, but we know that that is not possible because nobody has ever been able to do that except Jesus, who is the only perfect one who ever lived on this earth. And we're not Jesus. And the 10 Commandments are not the plan of salvation. The 10 Commandments, or the Sinai covenant first mentioned in Exodus 10, is a covenant of law. And the purpose of the law, well, it was twofold. It was to reveal God's perfection as something to be aimed for, but also to expose mankind in our failure, in our efforts to measure up. I liken the 10 Commandments to perhaps a speed limit imposed by a state to regulate highway behaviour before the sign is posted. Look, I may well have been someone who sped and broke the rules wantonly, but I didn't know it. And yet I could have caused terrible destruction by my actions. But if anyone says you're a lawbreaker, I could have said I don't even know what a lawbreaker is, because it had never been defined. But once the sign is posted there, whatever that sign says, 50 miles an hour, suddenly I know that I'm a lawbreaker the moment that I exceed that. And so does everybody else, including the police. And it's not the greatest example, but it is a little similar with humanity in that since Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, mankind has been in rebellion against the perfection of God. But we didn't understand how bad we were, or even we couldn't really have a vocabulary to describe sin and the impact of sin. But once the 10 Commandments are posted, we now understand what we are, and we can name it. Idolatry is a sad and common malay of the human heart, that search to fill the God-shaped hole with idols of all sorts and descriptions, when in truth only God and He alone is capable of meeting our deepest need and filling that hole. And we know that idolatry is often a downward slide. It opens the door to all the other sins mentioned in these commandments. And that's why idolatry is one of the most dangerous sins, because once we put anything else in God's place, we are so vulnerable to slide downwards into the other sins. And one sin tends to open the door to the others. It unlocks the key to the others. And the law, well, it gives us the boundary in which we are safe. It's not meant to suffocate us. It's not meant as that. It's meant to guide us towards the path of life. The law ultimately may restrain us then from committing the worst of sins, but what the law cannot do is save anybody. It can only show us where we go wrong. It can only condemn us, if you like, to use a strong word, if we break one of the commandments. And James says that if we break even one of the commandments, we're just as accountable as if we had broken them all. And so what's the answer? Well, we need to be saved from the sin that we cannot help but commit.
Yeah, John, I think that we've pretty much established that these commandments only truly show us, they reflect to us the condition of our hearts, right? And that is that we have this propensity to sin, but truthfully, it can't transform us. It doesn't have the power to do that. So should we then observe these 10 commandments today, or were these perhaps only precepts that were practiced back in the Old Testament days?
Well, God is the same in both the Old and the New Testament, and he's the same God that created the world and that guides our paths in this day and age. And the Ten Commandments, well, they are rules of conduct and ethics for all time. They will be part of the laws of heaven. And indeed, many judicial systems around the world are based on the foundations found right here in these Ten Commandments. And so we should always attempt by God's grace to keep them. The point is, however, that we do and we have and we will fail. On our very best day, we will fail to keep those commandments. Keeping the whole law is simply impossible. And thank God that there is no condemnation, Romans 8 verse 1, to those who are in Jesus Christ.
Yeah, thanks for that, John. And something that I find quite interesting, the part about the keeping of the Sabbath, I find that it creates quite a bit of discussion, doesn't it?
Sometimes it does, though I think it is one of those issues, Esther, that many Christians have spent far too much time discussing in place of more urgent matters. But seeing as you asked, Moses stated that the Sabbath was in honour of the fact that God created the world in 6 days. He rested on the seventh. So he consecrated that day. Once Jesus rose from the dead on the first day of the week, the early church began meeting together on a Sunday. Sometimes you might hear it called the Lord's Day rather than on the traditional Sabbath, in honour of the day on which Jesus was risen from the dead. And so that discussion question remains, I guess, what is more important, that you observe the literal Sabbath or you observe the sabbatical principle and take a day of rest? Well, Paul wrote in Colossians 2, verse 16 through 18, let no one judge you in regard to the Sabbath. So I think, look, grace is extended where good people disagree on this, and it's one of those issues, whether it's a Saturday or Sunday, that is far from a deal breaker. There are more important things like the souls of mankind.
John, I do have to raise the fact that one of the things that I find quite concerning about our society today is our view on adultery and what that means. You know, in our day and age, there are so many conflicting views, if you will, on what's appropriate pertains to this. So would you say then that the seventh commandment has become obsolete, considering how our broader society deals with this issue?
Well, you know, the views of society do change, don't they? But one of the great reassuring truths of the Bible is that God never changes. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And what was sin then is still sin today. God invented sex, and he sets the limits of how it is best practiced. Sex is God's marriage gift, and when it's not practiced as intended, well, it causes sadness, heartache, and that is a long, long way from what he planned. And adultery was taken to mean only being unfaithful in marriage, but there are so many ways that mankind has devised to redefine marriage and pervert that God-ordained sexual union. The Apostle Paul warned against what he called fornication, which is experimental sex outside of marriage. Solomon himself warned against that as well in Proverbs. He cautioned youth against going after strange women, as he put that. But he may well have done well to take his own advice later in life, before he married 700 women and had 300 others whom he called concubines, and that led him into idolatry. And, you know, the reality is that where you have idolatry, you often have sexual immorality, and the two seem to run together down the same chute.
All right. Now, John, the last commandment was against covetousness. And I find that this is a word that isn't often used in our lexicon today. So considering that, how would we then define covetousness?
Well, I guess the simplest way to understand it today is comparing ourselves to others. That is effectively the spirit of covetousness. In that, it tempts us to say, that person has more than I do. I need some more of that for myself. Well, that person does that better than me. I want to be more like that. Coveting somebody else's property or somebody else's wife or even somebody else's skill set. Get me straight here. There are things that we can admire in others, and I think they are the principles of the joys of the Spirit, courage, tenacity, but trying to mould ourselves to be what God hasn't intended us to be is, well, that sort of just touches, I think, on the spirit of covetousness as well. But generally it's meant to be here coveting other people's possessions. Well, it's damaging to us. God ultimately is our source of all happiness and supply. And Jesus welcomes and invites us to ask if we have a need. So let him be your source of satisfaction in life because he is able.
Well said, John. Well said. All right, well, we've addressed quite a bit in today's episode. So how should we summarize Deuteronomy chapter 5?
Yeah, let's do that. Well, chapter 5 of Deuteronomy is one of two places we find in the Bible containing the 10 Commandments. The other is Exodus chapter 20. And these 10 Commandments, they reveal the holy character of God. And yet, truth is, we cannot keep the commandments, which shows us very clearly what we are and indeed what we need. We are sinful people who need salvation. But once we know that we all sin and fall short of God's glory and that we need a remedy and that remedy is only provided by the shed blood of Jesus Christ on the cross, well, now then, if we're willing to admit our guilt, we are welcomed into the saving and loving arms of Jesus himself, whose shed blood clears our record. It makes us clean in God's sight. Christ fulfilled the law on our behalf so that we, believing, can have righteousness credited to us. We are made right because of him. No, in fact, we are made perfect in God's eyes because he sees us through the saving grace of his Son, Jesus.
And what an encouraging way to conclude today's episode of Mission 66, knowing that in Christ Jesus, we are now clothed in his righteousness. Well, friend, I certainly hope that you've enjoyed today's episode, and why not let us know and be a part of the Mission 66 conversation on our social media platforms. You can reach out to us on Facebook and on Instagram by simply searching us at Mission 66. And while you're there, you can leave your comments on the episodes or perhaps ask a question on what you've learned. And we look forward to having a wonderful, intricate conversation with you on God's Word. So friend, until next time, I'm Esther for John and our entire team saying, may God bless you.
That's it for today's episode of Mission 66. But before you go, make sure to check out mission66.org for your free study guide. It's a great way to get more from the Bible and to see how it connects with your life. Cruise through the scriptures with John and Esther, chapter by chapter. Grab your free study guide at mission66.org and be all set for our next episode. While you're at the site, shoot John and Esther a message or ask them a question. You can also become a Mission 66 Global Partner with your donation, helping Mission 66 get to more places in more languages. All the actions at mission66.org. Mission 66 is a ministry partnership of TWR and Dr. Luis Sayao.